Hello.
Hello. How is everyone?
Good.
Okay.
Just finished my grading this second.
Oh,
Awesome.
well done, Joey.
Wow.
Uh,
Throw a party.
I think, because it was giving me some sort of error. So I guess I'll find out later.
Kawa.
Welcome back, Kawa. Just saw you.
Hello, I'm glad to see you.
Good to see you.
It's nice to have folks that jump into more than one of these conversations. We get to say hey and get to, yeah, it's really cool. You're not drinking something hot, Stephanie, are you, on this sunny? You are. Wow.
I am, and then I'm gonna wonder why my face is so red and I'm sweating. I'm also sitting here in a turtleneck and an additional sweater. Just
Wow.
But it was cool earlier.
It was. I have two extremes, so I'm either freezing or sweating like crazy. So I'm at that age.
I hear you. I've got my own microclimate going these days.
That's right. That's right.
Joey, you're kid free this afternoon?
Yep. She
Wow.
actually hasn't been sick for a couple of weeks now. It's unbelievable.
Oh. Okay.
Because they have at her school, they're very, very strict that even like a runny nose, they don't want to see them.
Yeah.
Like now with influenza and everything. So it's yeah.
And did she get COVID at some point?
We think we all had COVID, but like 2 years ago, so before testing was available. Because her birthday's end of February, and we actually went to Disney World, came back on March 1st, and we were so sick. So that's our theory. But other than that, it's just been like a lot of colds and runny noses and yeah. Everybody else healthy?
Yep.
Sorry, that growling in the back, that's my dog giving himself a massage, and he growls like that.
Mine is snoring, so every so often he just has these little snorts.
Well, good. We'll wait a few minutes. Hopefully folks will show up. The only person I heard from in advance was Natalie Corito, who said that she had a deadline to meet tomorrow and was like close to burned out. So she was like, I just need to bow out, which makes a lot of sense. But haven't heard from anybody else. We'll just take a few minutes and see who shows, and hopefully we don't have to try again to reschedule us.
Yeah, I took a bit of a break right after Easter so that I could like recover before end of term. So that was a nice strategy. That worked out well.
Yeah.
But it's end of term is busy, no matter how well you try to
Yeah.
manage it.
Yeah. Are you on the other side of marking, Stephanie, or are you still?
Yeah, I just finished my grading yesterday.
Oh.
A number of my grad students, I don't know if this is everyone's experience, but I've noticed a number of my grad students and fewer undergrads had to take incompletes or IPs. And so more things will come in, but I got everything submitted, so no one can yell at me. That's the most important thing. I don't want to get yelled at.
Yeah, I was very generous with extensions, like letting them pass things in until this morning pretty much. So
Yeah, for sure. It's such an odd time. Like, if you can cut them a break, do so. That was my theory.
On the other hand, I'm also like convinced more than ever that grading in the fine arts is like, well, maybe except for the more theory-based disciplines, I guess. But the grading just doesn't make sense at all, like it's not like we're training engineers that will be responsible for the safety of an aircraft or something, and we're just making so many exceptions and extensions, and it's like, it makes no sense,
Mm-hmm.
Although it's funny, I mean, I think our students are so hardwired to go after grades that the minute you have a pass fail, you see them kind of taking their foot off and it's such a pity. They just transfer their energies into the other courses. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, what's happening this time of year for you?
Sorry, this term for us?
Yeah, what's happening? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have any grading
No,
or exams occurring.
no. Just kind of
So,
curious what your yearly cycle looks like.
yeah, I mean, like since COVID, it has always been different each year. So right now we are just organizing a project in entrepreneurship, and we are organizing a competition happening at the end of the month. So that's the priority right now.
Oh, okay. What
Yeah.
kind of competition?
So it's basically we have a 9 months training for students who have business ID, but related to either the environment or want to have a social impact with their business ID. So basically the selection process is that they go through a pitch competition. And then after that, we pick the ones that have the most potential to be trained and mentored.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
How long does the training last if they enter into that training?
Yeah, so it lasts 9 months, like around 2 semesters.
Yeah.
And they have a 1-year training. And we also try to transfer them into like a little bit more sophisticated trainings, and we encourage them to, for example, like making their business ID into real ones. So it's the second time that we're doing that. And yeah, the first cohort that we have, like 80% of business IDs went into something real. Some of them even registered their business. So it's basically introducing students into social entrepreneurship.
Okay,
Yeah.
Fantastic.
cool.
Hi, Rachel. Hi, Liz. We're just
Hi.
chatting.
Sorry,
We
I was
hadn't actually
late.
started.
I think we should jump ahead. We got the critical
Yeah.
math, and other folks may join yet still, but
Because we never have enough time.
don't wanna wait forever. Never have enough time, I know. Once the conversation gets going, I'll just start us off. Usually Anna from Fourth Space does the very initial welcome, but they're busy today, so I'll step into her shoes and just say, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining this conversation or rejoining this conversation. We tried once back in late February or so, and just really glad that folks were interested enough to reconvene to pursue this conversation and see where we land with how we position ourselves vis-a-vis the Sustainable Development Goals and what we might undertake and aspire to at Concordia in relation to gender equality. So I think I know everyone here. I don't think I need to do the kind of like who I am and what I do exactly in the Provost's office. I'll just say a quick word about what's interesting for me about the SDGs. Monica, our co-host here today, co-facilitator, will do the same, and then we'll kind of launch into the conversation. If folks don't mind, I'd like to do a recording because we make these sessions available. If anybody else who had signaled an interest in this subject wanted to watch later, does anybody object to recording? If not, I'll go ahead and start now. Great. So just as a very quick background and introduction, my interest in the SDGs is connected to and somewhat stems from my own PhD work years ago that was really focused on how universities enact their commitment to quote unquote civic engagement. And in that work, I often felt the absence of a kind of shared framework and shared goals that universities could work on with governments and communities. And the SDGs are, I think, an interesting example of that kind of framework. And so I have an interest from that perspective of just having some commonly articulated, okay, here's what we're trying to achieve, and here's a way that we would measure progress, and it allows a kind of collaboration. And on top of this, of course, like all of you, I'm sure, I just feel this deep sense of urgency around living outside of sustainable planetary boundaries and all the implications that has for future generations. So the SDGs, I think, help generate some focus and some energy and some urgency around those sometimes existential problems, and give us a common set of objectives to work with. So that's kind of my motivation and interest in the SDG framework. And Monica will do the same to introduce herself and her interests, and then we'll kind of walk you through what we're going to talk about today and dive in.
Yeah, hi everyone. Just in terms of me, I'm currently AVP, responsible for research, development and outreach in OVP RGS. And I'm a prof in, although I think they've forgotten about me at this stage, in geography, planning and environment when I get to go there. I work with Indigenous communities in coastal settings. I've worked with the James Bay Cree, or Crees of Iowishi, for nearly 30 years, and also work in Northern Australia with Torres Strait Islanders, mostly on stewardship and various strategies, Indigenous-led, to support the protection and recognition of Indigenous land and sea territories. Like Jason, my interest in the SDGs is really, like I'm sure most of you, like absolute, really deep concern about where we're headed. Real sense of urgency about, redefining our relationship to the planet and to one another. And I think that the SDGs offer a really good, a list of good intentions, starting points for a dialogue that might fashion an improved world of social and environmental justice and responsibility. And I think also, particularly, working with Indigenous people, I'm always reminded of, the need for us to be thinking of our roles as settlers and treaty people and our responsibilities to reconciliation. And I think that the SDGs, although they are problematic in terms of their engagement with Indigenous people's interests, I think that they do offer a bit of a kind of a space for a conversation where we're asking about our responsibilities in relation to reconciliation. Also today, you're probably aware, May 5th is commemorated as National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Children. So wearing red, I don't have a red dress, but it is, it's also wearing red to honor the lives of those missing and murdered women. So a sobering reminder of the context from so many women. Jason, over to you.
Good. So we're just going to do a quick tour for folks to introduce themselves or reintroduce themselves. Just folks here mostly know each other, but anyway, we'll do a quick tour. Maybe just talk a little bit about who you are, what you do at Concordia, and what's your interest in either the SDG framework or your connection to gender equality as a subject. Maybe we'll start with Stephanie, since she's the first on my screen.
Hi, sorry, of course, my printer just went off. So I'm Stephanie Patterson. I'm in the Department of Political Science. My area of expertise is feminist governance. So I write a lot on that within the Canadian context, but I've also served as a consultant with various government and international organizations, including the OECD, particularly around their gender and, their, what do they call it? Gender inclusive public governance framework. So, so I was delighted when Jason invited me to take part in the conversation, and I'm happy to hear what everyone has to say. So thank you.
Okay, thanks. Joey?
Hi, so I'm Joey, or Joanna is my official name, Brzezowska. I'm in the Department of Design and Computation Arts in the Fine Arts. I was previously Associate Dean Research. And I've been, I don't know, I feel like I've been extremely interested in gender, almost like since my earliest memories, and gender equity. And always, anyway, so it's been a passion in every part of my life. Most importantly, since my work, even actually my research area, which is electronic textiles, for me was a way that I can use, a way that I can introduce more women and girls, because I do a lot of mentoring, even in elementary school and throughout, into careers in innovation and science and technology. by merging, a craft that is traditionally more female, like textiles, and then electronics, which is at least, oh, actually, I should say like textiles are traditionally more female in our context, but not in other places around the world. Anyway, so I do tons of like mentoring and volunteering, focusing on women and girls in entrepreneurship and high tech through arts and design.
Great mix. Thanks, Joey. Awa.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Hawa. I'm the executive director at Concordia. So we are a Fil-a-Vie group and a nonprofit organization. So our role actually at Concordia University is to sensitize students into a community development project. So we offer internship programs or other forms of experiential learning programs for students to be involved into projects that are either related to entrepreneurship, environment, technology, and media and advocacy. And so we work also in international development, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, where, I mean, the context of gender equality is quite different and has yes, I mean, different challenges where we try to sensitize students into that and get them involved into that with our internships. So that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Awa. Rachel.
Yeah, I muted. Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Berger. I wear a bunch of hats. So I'm Associate Dean of Academic Programs and Development at the School of Grad Studies. And I am for like 3 or 4 more weeks, interim director of the Indie program. And sometimes I get to be a professor in the history department, like Monica, not too often these days. And I'm also a fellow of the Simone de Beauvoir Institute, and I help do admin for women's studies and sexuality studies. So in terms of gender, I'm a historian of gender and sexuality. My work has been on the history of medicine in broad context. It started off as the history of abortion and of reproductive health in India, but then it sort of morphed into something slightly different. And now I'm working on the history of food, but also around issues of gender, labor, and caste in India. And so I'm trying to make sure that when I do sort of feminist work or gender work, that it's really intersectional. So I guess that's part of my interest. So my interest in sustainability, though, is less developed, but I guess I'm here because I'm interested in thinking about curriculum planning and sustainability, really, I guess at the grad level, but also like how to make interfaculty and interdepartmental collaborations possible within a structure that's a little bit more siloed. So thinking about like what sustainability education would look like at Concordia at really at every level, but in ways that reached a wide sort of plethora of students. I think that's what I'm about. Nice to meet you all. Nice to see most of you, and Hawa, nice to meet you.
Super cool. Thanks, Rachel. And Liz.
Hi, so I am here, let's see, I'm in the Communication Studies Department. I am a member of the Feminist Media Center, and Krista Linz could not be here today, so I'm also kind of got an extra cap on. I'm a co-director of the Loyola Sustainability Research Center, where I've been for just about a year. I have a long-term as a practitioner, as a media practitioner and somebody who does research creation. I'm primarily a filmmaker and interactive media maker, and all of my work has really been about promoting the rights of women and really working towards around issues of representation, equity in the industry, in the media industry. So one of the longest collaborative initiatives I've been a part of is with the International Association of Women in Television and Radio. And we do collaborative work around, such as, for example, a project we did on climate change, where we had, I was the executive producer. We chose 5 women from 5 countries to speak to really all of the issues that are kind of in these goals, but through kind of personal stories. So my focus is on participatory media practices, environmental media, and media advocacy. So really thinking about how media is related to social movements. And I'm also a part of the food group. Rachel, I heard you say that. the food studies group at Concordia. I think that should cover most of it, at least to get going.
Thanks, Liz. Great, amazingly diverse group of people here today. Super interesting to get all your perspectives on the subject matter. So I'm going to hand over to Monica to do a quick walkthrough of the agenda today, and then we'll dive into our first exercise.
Yeah, so thanks for all coming together. I mean, we're a small group, but just hearing all the intros there, obviously bringing quite a range of perspectives. For these discussions, I mean, our intention is to bring together faculty, staff, and students. And it's not a great time to get students in, but these are for first discussions really of the SDG framework. And the approach we've taken is a whole of the organization effort. And for the 17 rooms exercise, which is a kind of tried and tested formula that goes with the SDGs now, and many universities have used that exercise, but limited it to faculty researchers rather than bringing in a broader selection of the community. But we've really tried to have that diversity. We've also limited it for now to internal conversations, although as a next step, we see the need to expand that to wider conversations outside of Concordia. But so today, really a starting point during which we'll no doubt identify lots of opportunities to bring in additional perspectives and input. But this, the natural next step is to extend those outward. But for today, in terms of our agenda, and I'm not sure, Jason, if you have access.
Yeah, I guess I'm in charge of the screen sharing here today.
Wow. So you'll have seen it. Yeah, that's great.
Oh, okay.
So this was in your package. And just to give you a sense of today, I mean, we have a couple of kind of intro exercises to really help just establish a kind of context. The first of these will focus on the benefits and critiques of the SDG framework. We know that, it's got its limitations and its strengths. So just to put those on the table. We'll then spend just a few minutes looking at the current landscape in terms of what's currently happening at Concordia around SDG 5, and then start to go deeper, looking at the targets, really trying to identify university relevant targets for SDG 5, and then the main part will be just a brainstorm, this idea generation, where we'll really focus on what we can do in relation to, so that central question there, how the SDG framework can help focus and advance Concordia's activities related to gender equality and empowerment of women and girls. So, we can, over to you, Jason, we can get started with the first of these, the benefits and critiques of SDGs.
Good, thanks, Monica. So we're taking a moment to pause here and do this, just do a high-level situating ourselves vis-a-vis this framework, because we know there are reasons to be critical of this framework, and we want to give a moment for people to air those. And it's also, like I said in my own introduction, there are also reasons why this is a compelling framework. So we just want to take a moment before we dive into the specifics of this particular SDG to just give a moment to reflect on this, and to for you to contribute anything that you see in addition to what's listed here. I'll just walk us through there very quickly, and then if you have anything to toss in, just go ahead and open your mic and do so. And then we'll look at the flip side and the critical perspectives on the SDGs. So first, they create a common agenda, facilitating collaboration and shared goals. Liz, did you have a question? No? Okay. Second, they connect economic, social, and environmental aspects of sustainability. So they're comprehensive. They come out of, they build on the Millennium Development Goals, which are focused on poverty alleviation, and they combine in a whole strand of work at the UN around environmental goals, but they weave them together into this comprehensive framework. They place emphasis on clear and concrete targets and outcomes. Each SDG, each of the 17 SDGs has 5 to 10 targets associated with that. Each of those have indicators associated with them. They're very specific about what they are intending to achieve as a framework. And as I mentioned in my introduction as well, they help to build this sense of urgency by establishing 2030 as this really crucial deadline that we are hoping to meet and achieve these goals by that time. So I'll just pause here very quickly to see if anybody else has anything that they want to add to this list or their own kind of personal reflection on what the SDGs, how it's beneficial or interesting or what's compelling about that framework. And then we'll move to the flip side of the equation. I'll move to the flip side, and you're welcome to toss in any comments on either side of this as we go. So the critiques, the SDGs are so vast, it's difficult to know where to start and how to engage. They're comprehensive, and that's a positive, but it's also somewhat daunting in the sense of 17 things is a lot of things to pay attention to, and the interconnections between them then are even more difficult to really grasp comprehensively. A second critique, and this was one that Monica alluded to in her introduction, is that they fail to adequately take into account the rights, interests, and perspectives of Indigenous peoples. We had a visitor to the Loyola Sustainability Research Center's annual conference, Danica Littlechild, who was actually heavily involved in the process of validating the Sustainable Development Goals before the UN ratified them. And she talks about the just entirely inadequate space that was made for Indigenous peoples to contribute perspectives on and to have direct references and allusions to Indigenous peoples in the actual language of the Sustainable Development Goals. A third common critique is that the SDGs don't go far enough in addressing root problems. They identify things that we're targeting, but they don't really help us identify the things that are causing the kinds of problems that we're needing to solve. And the fourth common critique is that there are, in some cases, some internal contradictions between the SDGs or potential contradictions. How do we achieve economic growth at the same time as we preserve biodiversity is a common example. So just open up the floor here for anybody that wants to add anything on either side of this ledger, just in terms of kind of situating ourselves or the things that irk you about this framework or the things that somewhat inspire you. Just interested to get a little bit of a sense of this from you all. And then we'll dive into the next part of our exercise where we kind of look at what's already happening at Concordia around gender equality. So any thoughts, observations, critiques? If not, we'll move right into looking at the landscape. I'll give you just a second to collect thoughts. Good. I think, Monica, let's
no worries. Let's keep moving.
Yep.
Yeah, I've all the more time to brainstorm.
Yeah.
So for this part, so this is the landscape at Concordia exercise. So really what we're trying to do here is really put together a bit of a picture of what's already happening at Concordia around gender equity and empowerment of women and girls. So we've mapped this to some degree. It's not a complete picture of the current landscape. And it really tries to capture instances of focus. So what's happening in particular areas. So the three columns there, the first one really focused on research and research creation. So the Feminist Media Studio is there, of course, and the Simone de Beauvoir Institute. So two mainstays. And actually, I must say, Liz, that I had a look at the video or the website for the Feminist Media Studio. It's just gorgeous, really beautifully put together. but so the two very strong anchors for activities related to SDG 5, or certainly related to gender. And the middle column, academic programs and learning opportunities. So again, the Simone de Beauvoir Institute, number of programs within that, including the Summer Institute. And then Rachel, of course, Indy has to be in there. And the HUMA PhD programs, two very successful interdisciplinary programs at Concordia. And then in the third column, we have various services and initiatives. And I don't have seed there.
True. Sorry about that. Hala.
And
Lots of other places. We missed you here.
Yeah. Like, how are there particular, you have particular initiatives that focus on women and girls, or it runs through all that you do? I mean, do you have a particular focus? And it needs to be there, I know that, but.
Yes, no, we have like programs, like projects that are particularly focused on women and gender equality, particularly supporting them through economic empowerment and entrepreneurship. And also in Uganda, we have a project specifically that help women teachers to have access to education, to continuation of education. So this is something that is very focused on gender equality. Yeah.
Great. So in terms of what we're just trying to do here is really to highlight for, most of you are probably aware of these, but just to put them together to map out what's happening. And, it's an opportunity as well it helps us to see where our strengths and some of the concentrations of what we're doing are, but also some gaps. But this is an opportunity as well to identify if you see things that are missing, see things that you can't see. It would be great if you could identify those for us, but also, just any observations you have, just seeing that in terms of how you feel Concordia is currently contributing. Do we just have any observations?
I was just going to note, Monica, too. I mean, Stephanie, your work is centered on gender, but it's we didn't go down to like individual faculty's research programs. We tried to take a level up, but how do we represent that in the kind of the landscape of what's happening at Concordia? It's a little bit difficult question, but anyway, if you have suggestions about how to kind of represent the aggregation of interest, because I think I don't know if there's an informal feminist public policy group or a gender public policy group. Anyway, if there's anything else that you want to kind of just identify here that's not on the map that we could use to represent that work, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think for me, I'm sure every department has those nooks and crannies that you could certainly highlight. But I think for me, what's missing here, and I don't know if it's but it would be those governance or institutional processes, right? Mm-hmm. So what exists at the higher level of the university to ensure not just gender equality, but intersectional equality, in terms of hiring processes, promotion, awards and recognition, right? And one thing I'll say too, just because I've had a bee in my bonnet for some time, I would really love the university to engage in a gender audit. Because I do think that there are a number of things that happen at the procedural level or the policy level that do result in disparate impact, and it doesn't seem to go anywhere. And I think I think if Concordia really wants to show commitment to equality, then they need to start looking at their own processes. So I would say, we need a bigger kind of macro level here to try and capture some of those, initiatives at the level of governance that that the university has embarked on to move forward with equality, but also, more as a preemptive or a solid commitment to identifying how some of those processes might not be great for equality. I think there needs to be a higher order process in place. That would be my 2 cents.
Great point. Great point. And there's also things like pay equity initiatives that aren't represented here as well.
Well, that's right. That's right.
In that same transversal scope, I think that you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
But also hidden within offices, like I know within OVPRGS, we're making a really special effort in terms of awards and external recognitions to really address the gender imbalance. There is also, Stephanie, there's a task force that is just about to be struck. It's actually in the process of being struck on inclusive excellence, which really responds to a call for an equity audit that wouldn't just be a gender, there's so much happening now across the university that this idea of inclusive excellence is in some ways an attempt to respond to the many needs and requests coming forward for a reconsideration of recognition and the disproportionate kind of burden on certain groups. So hopefully that will be a response to some of your concerns there.
I saw. Go ahead, Mike.
Sorry, Jason. No, go.
I just seen recently, in relation to your suggestion of a gender audit, there was a bank, was it TD or RBC, that said they were going to have an outside law firm conduct, I think they called it an equity audit. It wasn't specifically focused on gender. That as their kind of next step is like not just internal reviews, but let's have an external review. And is that what the kind of thing that you're thinking of? And if so, the question is who does those? Who would do such a thing?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm envisioning, and of course, I mean, I say gender, but I really mean broader equity considerations from an intersectional perspective, and certainly one that would be attentive to Indigenous folks as well. I hope that goes without saying, but so there are a number of consultants around who do this sort of thing. There are also, I'm sure, law firms that do it, but my own network is focused more on consultants that have this sort of expertise.
Okay, cool. Super valuable contribution to just kind of like plotting what's on the landscape right now. Anybody else have?
Just a couple of things are coming up, and I think I'm glad Monica mentioned the equity audit of like the general equity audit, but like I worry a little bit about the reliance on consultants and doing this as like broad university audits, because I think the change, like the conversations really need to start like within the departments, right? Like just talking about faculty, like one of the most difficult conversations that we had was in April, and my department was in April 2020, when we kind of, had these our first Zoom department meetings, and like all of the women were in the department were like, we're just kind of accounting for the amount of care work that we were doing for the students. And it's not that our male counterparts didn't want to be helping, it's that they weren't being asked. And so I think like there's obviously use in doing these broad audits, but like really thinking about how to start these more difficult conversations on the micro level, using like relying on relationships of trust that are already extant, I think is really important too. And maybe they go hand in hand, and maybe sort of consultants guide us on how to do that work better, but it just feels like these are actually really internal conversations to have, and the other thing too is like, I guess I'm thinking about the new colleagues that we've been really lucky in history, where we've had a lot of not necessarily hires, but new folks to have joined us. And also I'm thinking a lot about sexuality studies and how those programs are developing. I think we also need to start pushing the box on gender a little bit, because I think, you know, when we're talking about these broad scale equity issues, we tend to think about women, and that's there, and that's sort of historically where the inequities start. But I think we really need to start reckoning with how we're going to think about like beyond the binary around gender. And I'm thinking of particularly like some of my more junior colleagues, like that's something that they're calling for, and we have no capacity for thinking about that beyond like our personal politics, right? So I wonder if that needs to be part of the conversation too. Yeah, I don't even know where that really fits when we're trying to make these broad scale changes, but it just feels really important to bring up in this sort of session, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. And certainly very much part of the brainstorm and where we want to go with that in terms of really trying to find some concrete recommendations that we can take further. Just wanted to say as well, I mean, it's a bit of a, but just on the question of the mapping, you will have seen in the package that Jason sent, the publications. And yeah, you see there where under 5, 37 publications, but of course, so much of the wonderful work that Liz and Kristen and so many others do in this space doesn't get captured there. So there's, there's a wider conversation around all sorts of recognitions. There's the service, but there's also the research that's done and the need to capture and value and recognize all of that. So that's part of the conversation. And of course, women often engaged in areas of research, both in terms of advocacy as well as research creation, presumably there's a gender imbalance there that tends to get less of a spotlight than some other areas. So just wanted to make that point. Okay.
Well, I wanted to say one quick thing. I really want to appreciate both Rachel and Stephanie's perspectives of really kind of starting with us at Concordia.
Yeah.
And even as Stephanie said, starting within departments, because it really, and of course, even then starting with ourselves. One of the things that we did with the Feminist Media Studio through COVID was really have these conversations about how this global pandemic really just exacerbated deep-seated inequities and try to surface them and understand them. And I think, I mean, that's not original to us, or I think the whole world was grappling with that, but it does I'm just echoing what Rachel and Stephanie say about these inequities that are pre-existing, I think will only be exacerbated as the tensions around global uncertainty, I mean, sustainability continue. I know, and then just pragmatically, I know like maybe one of the biggest ways that the inequities kind of play out in our department are really like supervising. I don't know if that's sort of general, but if you look at any female colleague in the department, it's almost a 2-to-1, like
wow.
numbers of care supervising. And I don't know that from, I haven't measured that. We have tried to do that at times, and service. So supervision, service, like the heavy lifting, especially within the department. Like if you kind of begin to look at leadership more widely, and I know this is changing and I'm really happy about all of that. You see more diversity, but certainly like the heavy lifting within, let's call it the home community, I mean, the home department really is quite imbalanced. So, and I just love what you said, Rachel, about it's true. Like, how can we have those honest conversations? But maybe they need to be like at both of those levels. Thank you both for that contribution. That's really, really helpful.
Yeah, I wanted to basically also echo the same thing, really great points. I also wanted to add to the discussion that when we think of the university, we often think of the academics and the students and the research, but we also have huge numbers of staff. and a lot of women in support roles, administrative roles. And we tend to forget about them when we talk about the university and how they're affected by all kinds of things. And often not given the same kind of flexibility that academics can take. And the flexibility, of course, is both a gift and a curse, because as during the pandemic, you know, the work-life balance and especially for mothers, I think has been a gigantic issue. Anyway, so let's not forget about support staff and just staff in general. There's a lot of women there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joey. Anyone else?
Oh, and I also just wanted to mention, I sent those 2 articles, I guess last month when I was replying to the email, which, because I don't have much formal training in feminist or gender studies, they were very interesting to me. So one focusing on, you know, looking at the lens of care and how that creates huge gender disparities in academic institutions specifically. And the other one was just this neoliberal governance structures, which again, you know, are based on a different kind of model of the ideal academic.
Yeah.
Thanks, Joey. And incredible just how some of these studies have shown the burden on women, but also how there have been some groups, and particularly men, who have actually, you know, in terms of journal submissions, they've been way up for some individuals. So there's been real winners and losers in this, a very uneven impact, which I think is one of the really defining aspects of COVID, just how uneven it's been. Okay, actually, Jason, I think we could stop sharing there. And I think it's back to you. We'll move on to the next exercise, where we really get to take a closer look at the SDGs. There's a tendency for us to think of the themes, and most people are now, it's amazing just how many people are familiar with the goals. My daughter is doing them at school, and it's really great that they've become, you know, such a mainstay in conversations. But the deeper look at the targets is often not happening. So let's do that. Over to you, Jason.
Thanks. I will share again if folks don't have in front of them the packet with the targets actually listed. So maybe let me know if you'd like me to share again, and because I can put them on full screen and be able to see them. Anybody need a share? No. Okay. So what we're going to do now is just to quickly look at the 9 targets that the UN articulated as part of the ratification process for the SDGs back in 2015. These are the 9 things that the countries who are a formal part of the UN have adopted as the relevant targets for achieving gender equality in relation to sustainable development globally. These 9 items run across the spectrum. They were developed and they're articulated as targets for national governments. They're not articulated as targets that are relevant to universities per se. So what we're going to do is take a two-pronged perspective on these targets. First of all, we're going to take them at face value and look at them and say, which of these seem most relevant to us in our work as a university? And or which of these do we have the most to contribute to as a university? And then we're going to step back from these articulations around gender equality and ask, if we were articulating our own targets as an educational institution, what might those be? What might those look like? Would they be different than these? Would they be just adaptations of these? And so on. So what we're first going to do, and one of the things we actually do typically at this point is we run a poll, but I'm realizing that our 4th space team may not they had a conflict at this time when we had to do the rearrangement. They may not be accessible to us to run this poll, which we hadn't realized. So we may just have to do like people just speaking out which of these they find the most relevant for universities. So if you could just take a quick look at those 9 targets and say, identify your top 3. Which of these seem most relevant to us as a university, or that we have the most to contribute to? And then we're going to just take a rough poll. We'll have to do it manually. Good thing we don't have a super large group here today, and see what people think are the most relevant. What we're trying to do is get a sense of where might we focus our attention and energies.
I think I do need the share after all.
Yeah.
Or if you can just send us a link, maybe.
I'll do a screen share, and then I'll just so that you can get them right away. And then I can also send a link as well to the page that these are drawn from. Are you seeing the full set of targets there?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, or actually maybe Prem or David. Oh, you know what? I just realized we didn't mention that Prem and David, the 2 knowledge brokers from the VP Research Office, are with us here today as well. Sorry about that, Prem and David. We got off our regular script. They're in the background here, just listening in on the conversation. Maybe one of you could put the link to this SDG page in the chat, if you don't mind.
So you want us to pick the 3?
Who's ready? Yeah, who's ready to share what they think are the 3 that are most pertinent, relevant, and we have the most to contribute to as an institution? Hawa, did I see your hand up? You want to?
Sorry, as an institution or our role within the institution?
Yeah, that's a good question. If you feel like you have kind of perspective on the institution, think about it as us as a university, as Concordia. If you need to personalize it, just like what do you and Seed and the folks you work with, if you want to think about it from that perspective, you can do that as well.
Okay.
Whichever one you feel like you have the most insight on.
So I can go first. So
Yeah.
for me, definitely 5.8, 5.5, and 5.4.
5.8, 5.4, 5.5, and 5.8. Sorry for having to do this manually this time. Usually this is a nice Zoom poll.
Yeah, mine are kind of the same. So 5.8 and 5.5 for sure. But then I think 5.4 but for me 5.9 feels really doable. But 5.4 feels almost more important because I feel like, okay, it's not a domestic, we're not at home, but I feel like the space of our departments and like our little micro units act in the same way. And it could be like, it'd be pretty radical and very cool to put that as one of our values. But 5.9 feels really achievable.
And 5.4 is relevant to what you were just saying about your departmental discussions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and also students and, supervision that came up earlier, all of this care that is gendered.
Yeah.
I would like to say 5.1, like knowing that we are here to educate people, the fact that we sensitize them about that. Same as my colleagues, like 5.8 is a very important element that we think we have an important role in, and 5.5.
And 5.5. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Stephanie, what do you think? Or Liz? You still?
Yeah, Liz, did you want to go ahead?
I'll go after you, Steph. You start.
Okay, well, I'm going to cheat because I have 5.1 and 5.9 tied, and then I would say 5.4 and 5.5.
Okay. Pretty strong consensus so far. Are you going to break the consensus, Liz? Or are you going to go with the flow?
Okay, so I did 5.1 in discrimination of women and girls. And then 5.5, ensure full participation in leadership and decision-making. And the third one was 5.4.
Okay.
But it's crazy that I didn't put 5.8 because honestly, that's really what I do. So
we'll let you have a fourth.
okay.
Okay, super strong consensus around 5.4, 5.5, 5.8, 5.9 with some 5.1s in there as well. This would show up nicely on this poll results, but I think 5.5 is all the way through unanimous leadership and decision-making. Strong agreement around 5.8. Some folks who thought the policies and legislation was an important factor too, and then just the general effort around ending discrimination. So anybody want to comment on what we see there, where we have consensus, what we've left out that we think is maybe important but unimportant for us? Any comments or observations folks want to make on the consensus around 4, 5, 8, 9, 1, 4, 5, 8, 9? We've taken 5 of the 9.
You know, I wanted to just bring this up in this group. So, you know, I feel that the 5.9 is something like I've worked in the area of media advocacy. So how can media be used to shift policy? But I know in speaking with a lot of my colleagues, there's kind of a discomfort around academics actually pushing particular policies. So I was kind of curious how people feel about that. Like whether people feel that like research should not be in that realm of particular advocating. Like I know in a kind of a classroom, we all uphold a lot of standards of welcoming a range of discussions and perspectives. So how does that play out in as a university in terms of assuming like specific policies? And is it different because it's like sustainability and gender versus this or that?
And what would alternative routes for policy development and advocacy be from
See, the way I interpreted that was that within our institution to strengthen our internal policies and
okay, interesting.
At all levels, right? To keep doing that work, as Rachel said, also in questioning gender, etc., to keep pushing it further.
But is that, Liz, I think you're talking about more policy development and like public policy.
Well, even, you know, I'm from the US, so even what's playing out in the United States around like whether you can talk about critical race theory in a classroom at any level, or, you know, like really how complex it is to be an educator, keep your job, and still have maybe less so at Concordia at this particular moment. But I'm just curious. I love what Joey's saying. I think it should be absolutely, you're right, like internal policy. But I guess I was also thinking about kind of our role as both researchers and educators and how we use our platforms, our positionalities to advocate or not advocate for certain policies. Like, let's say we had somebody in the class who didn't believe in climate change, and, you know, I'm going really far there, just saying it out loud.
Yeah, if I could say, so I think this is a really great point, because I think this is what makes especially universities or institutions of higher education really quite unique, because you know, when we're talking about, you know, curriculum and things like that, I think it does get a little bit thorny, and things like academic freedom and all of these things, it gets really difficult to impose from above. You know, but so I don't think I could answer that question. except, maybe that this, 5.9 could establish a framework for helping departments or specializations come to common principles for curriculum development, or, things like that, that would allow for, that academic freedom piece, but also being attentive to broader context around inequality and marginalization. But also, I think when we think about institutionalizing equality measures, we can think of it as, kind of a mainstreaming approach where we adopt an intersectional lens to, policies and programs that are being developed that ideally should be across the whole institution. But that also, we shouldn't lose sight of like what we would call targeted or special measures, right? To help, I'm talking like a liberal, to help level the playing field, right? Now I'll have to go have a shower, but you know what I mean, right? That there's typically a dual focus around these things, so that but I think the question around education, design, and delivery is a really important piece that we'd have to have a good conversation around. Yeah.
And I just wanted to come back to what I was saying earlier, and I don't mind going on the record with this, but I feel that Concordia could be much more of a leader in this area, considering the people who make up the institution. And even when we think of the SRP, the Strategic Research Plan, in response to the EDI policies from the Tri-Council, I mean, our first one was a joke. Again, I know this is being recorded, but it was, and it shouldn't have been. And I find in a lot of committees that I've been on, this idea of strengthening our policies and taking a leadership position and starting with internally, right? So that we're not just doing the bare minimum that's required by whatever lawsuit, but that universities like Ryerson or Emily Carr, UBC, they were doing so much more, so much earlier. And it's a shame that Concordia doesn't see that as a priority. And we're often just playing catch up, I find, with other institutions.
In what areas in particular, Joey, just to...
EDI in general, I guess.
EDI,
so,
yeah.
And EDI across the spectrum of,
I mean, not to make excuses at all, but I mean, Quebec has been so hampered in the process of collecting data. It really has. It's such an important starting point just to know what the situation is. And of course, we really have been very limited in our ability to collect. I mean, there are other issues as well. And I'm not for a minute countering what you're saying, but that has been a fundamental constraint on moving forward that accounts for some of the lag.
But I think there's also been like a culture of throwing a lot of money and attention at issues as they explode in the public realm, right? Like there was, I think, and that's been, it's been really, I don't want to say it's been, okay. It's been challenging, I think, in some ways to think about like what that means. And I mean, not to use a Concordia example, but to use the McGill one, right? Like they had no Indigenous people on staff. And then the recommendations of the TRC came out. And the next year, the goal for hiring was 35 Indigenous professors. And it's like, that's not really realistic. Like when you have a culture of exclusion, to overturn it just because there's goodwill. And I feel like, we don't, it's like we want to do the right thing, but the right thing seems to be determined always like with hindsight and urgency. And I feel like maybe gender is actually one of the places where that's not true, because like there has been such a push, I think it's for the most part by by white middle class women who occupy these positions anyway for gender equity. But it's like, then, right now the push for EDI is so strong, but I worry sometimes about the way in which it can feel really tokenistic when we hire people to positions and expect that they solve, like they solve the equity issue around the thing that they're connected to. And like, these are conversations that we have a lot of, right? Around, around race, around, I think we're going to start having it around ability really soon. Like I know FOFA is already having it a really important way around ability and disability, around indigeneity. We don't really have it around class, but so Liz, I think your point is really good. I kind of don't know how to respond because it's like, I think it's really true that, you want to hold these and like at the same time, we're also dealing with like, the culture wars around like wokeness, around Bill 32, around cancel culture. And it's really hard to know where the middle ground is in terms of like, to take another SRP term, like growing smartly or whatever we're supposed to be doing, but also responding impactfully, while not wanting to trigger knee-jerk reactions, right? That come from abandoning that balance, like in the classroom and in other spheres. So I don't know, that wasn't that helpful, but it was just, that's what was coming to mind as everybody was talking.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, right? So I just put two little funny quotes, like memes in the chat. So maybe I used the wrong term. Maybe it wasn't the SRP, but the response that we had to send to the Tri-Council with respect to EDI. What was that called, Monica? That was the SRP, right?
That was the CRCP. We had to develop an equity action plan to support the Canada Research Chairs policy program.
Yeah.
And that came out of that legislation, right? That's been so much.
But also the strategic research plan. I mean, since that's, what I'm most involved with at the university, I find it's really just kind of doing the bare minimum instead of trying to be proactive and transformational and taking this leadership like other universities have done. Like I read a whole bunch of other SRPs when I was working on this, right? And especially the ones from British Columbia were just amazing, like taking such bold stances about EDI. And I find that it's kind of a lost opportunity for Concordia that we're just always playing catch up.
A lot has happened over the last 5 years. I think we're ready to review that. I think we're just at the end of that strategic research plan. And of course, I mean, it is a bit of a, but like 5 years ago, we were in a very different place, different conversations. I mean, they were being conversations in certain rooms, but this is a conversation across the university now. So I think that the next plan will look very, very different, even at Concordia.
So I don't want to interrupt the flow, but I'm going to pose a question, and then we're going to take a quick break. If people need to use the washroom, grab a coffee, just stretch their legs. The question is, so we've looked at the UN targets. If we were establishing our own targets, and let's say for 2030, what would our kind of like planting our flag out there, what would it look like? Is there something, Joey, from these other SRPs that you've read that really stands out as like, okay, now that's a transformational goal? What might our flag be that we would plant out there? And then also, what are the things that we might do in the meantime to help get ourselves there, build that momentum, lay some groundwork, take some first steps? What are the things, to use the language of the organization that instituted this process of 17 rooms, they talk about things that are big enough to matter, but small enough to get done. They not just small things, not tokenistic things, and not the grand vision, but the kind of like important first big steps. What could those be? So those are the two questions we're going to focus the last part of our conversation on here today. We'll take a quick break, let folks stretch out for a few minutes, and then we'll come back at maybe we'll come back at 4:15, so 5 or 6 minutes, and then we'll meet you back here soon. Okay.
And by the way, Monica, I just wanted to say that I totally agree that when you came on board, the Office of Research definitely started its transformation for the better. That was, so I fully agree with that. I just always wish we could do more, right?
You made it, Monica.
There's so much to do. It's absolutely overwhelming. And when it's, I mean, we know at the higher level, but it's the individual stories. Like when I was co-chairing that working group on the impact of the pandemic on faculty and librarians. And it was really focused on caregiving. I mean, what people were going through during the pandemic. It was, yeah, it's, and of course, I mean, my concern is that as things go back, I mean, it's the lag effect. There's already a delay in terms of research and career. It's a slow moving vehicle, right? But, you know, how I worry about how quickly it'll be forgotten, the loss and what people went through during that period, and how readily people will want to move forward. And it's the remembering and the carrying forward of that inequity and the unevenness. Fortunately,
Yeah, I mean, like on that, the one thing that came up a lot, and I think Monica, I feel like you got the brunt of the rage emails that Stephanie and I and a bunch of other people were putting together in that moment, which I hope like has transformed into the task force on equity. But like one conversation we're having is that like so many of the conversations were tied to precarity around academic jobs, and like that's really necessary. Like we really had to think about colleagues who, you know, who are not tenured yet or who are in precarious positions, but it's really hard as like somebody mid-career with like, and someone sandwiched between like old parents, young children, to think about like what it cost me, right? And like when talking to my colleagues that are like at my age, like a few years post tenure, but not yet full and not close to it, like it's that loss of thinking like, wow, we may never jump to that next level because of these 2 years of trying to manage careers that are kind of falling apart, right? So it felt just so difficult because it's like you want to deal with the people who are most at risk of being, you know, just of not succeeding at all. But like then for those of us in the middle, it's like, well, what does our life look like now? Or what does our future look like now? Because I feel like it's going to take me years to regain all that time that I lost.
And also the perception of that loss, like women are so much slower to move forward into full professorship.
Yeah.
Unless somebody taps their shoulder and says, you're ready and I'll work with you and let's do this. Yeah. It just doesn't happen. And then when it comes to the awards, they're not eligible for the awards. So we get caught. Like it's, you know, it's so important that we go right back and work through these issues at an early stage and at the department level, right? Because that's where you get picked up first. So somebody sees the work you're doing, you know, you get the small award. Like by the time we're looking for superstars, like if your own department hasn't recognized you and shone a light on you, we're not going to see you from a distance, right?
Absolutely.
And, you know, and it's not just mothers of toddlers and stuff. It's also so many students, so many kids, even in, you know, we keep parenting them till forever, I guess. But kids in their 20s are having such increased mental health issues, right? And just the amount of care that is needed these days is just huge.
Well, and those, you know, like another thing, this I think has a lot to do with gender in the institution, is like I felt like, and I kept writing this down and like trying to frame it, but like it felt like the pandemic was so equaling in its effects on everyone in the first moment, right? Like it felt like everybody's at home, and like, you know, it's one thing to think about like gender and equity and labor writ large in the workforce and be like, okay, well, you know, if it was going to become an economic question for the family, then it gets really gender. But it was like, what do you do when, you know, when two colleagues both have professorships at Concordia, and yet you see one is taking on the bulk of that load during the pandemic and the other isn't? And it's just, it just felt like, you know, even in these roles that were commensurate, it was still being so gendered. And I just kept being like, dads, this is your moment, you know, speak up about how difficult it is to be like on Zoom when somebody's yelling, because that yelling is reverberating through the house. It doesn't have to be as gendered as it ended up being. And I just felt like it's a conversation that's so difficult to have, because like, these are also our friends and colleagues, and you don't want to call, you know, you don't want to call out the dynamics, but like, I feel like there are these, yeah, like, it's hard within a university because we have this sense of equity and then the research rigor that buttresses that. But then it's like, you know, we're doing way more spousal hiring in arts and sciences than we ever have before. And there's a lot of weird tension around that, and no framework for a conversation about equity at all around race or gender. And it's like, it just feels like sometimes I worry that by focusing, you know, so much on the uplift, like again, of women, we don't, like, why are there no men here in this conversation on gender equity? You know, there's just no, it just feels like there are these walls that we need to break through to think about gender more dynamically, or get more sign on. And it's not like I have any answers, but it just felt like, yeah, the pandemic was because of the equalizing effect of literally having to be home in the same moment. That first month or two felt like, whoa, this is not just a women's problem. Like, this is something we're all experiencing. Yeah.
Jason, could you remind me of the question you asked before the break? I was so excited about the break, I wasn't really listening.
Yeah, so we really what we're ending here is on two questions. And it may feel a little bit like, you know, we're not ready to be aspirational, but one of the questions is like, if we were going to plant our flag and to say like, here's where we want to be 5 years from now, or by 2030, or like, what's the thing that we would target, or how do we articulate what a goal or a target would be for us as an institution around gender equality? And then secondly, what are some ideas? Like, how would we get started? What would we do? What's a first thing that we could organize around, rally around, undertake, commit to, that would help us kind of start moving in that direction? So that is kind of a two-pronged question, and take either prong or continue on with the flow of the conversation as it's going now. But that's kind of what we're leaving space for in this part of the conversation, is that kind of forward looking, okay, some diagnosis, some look at the landscape, here's the experience, and now like, okay, what can we do? How can we organize? How can we focus? How can we amplify things that are going on here that are effective? I don't know if Liz, if you want to talk about the work in the studio, that, you know, if it has any potential resonance across the institution, in terms of how you've approached this work. I don't know, just open floor for folks to start thinking out loud about where we might go to make the situation different or better. I don't know if maybe you could talk about, Joey, your own, like, what struck you about reading these other SRPs that you thought was so compelling? And anyway, over to you all.
So I'm also on the board or something of D3, and we've started this new program this summer for entrepreneurship in the arts and in the culture industries and not-for-profit. And I remember I was in a conversation with Graham when he was VPRGS, or maybe even before that, I don't remember. And this was just when Justin Trudeau had gotten elected, right? And Justin, whatever we think about him, he was like, okay, half my cabinet will be women, right? And he just said it. He's like, fuck it. Oh, this is being recorded, sorry. And, you know, in District 3, because it's technology to a great extent and it's entrepreneurship, the gender imbalance was huge, right? And I told Graham, let's do what Justin did. Let's just say, and I know we've made great progress in many other units, etc., right? But I'd love to be able to just have the guts to say things like that, and for Concordia to be able to support those kinds of strong statements, right? So I do feel that District 3 is actually, and this is target 5.8, I guess, promote empowerment of women through technology, but not just technology as a way of delivering empowerment, but especially women being empowered in getting involved in high-tech startups and getting involved in all of these tech areas that are actually also increasing inequity these days, right? Such as machine learning and AI, full of algorithmic bias, and that's only getting worse, right? And ML and MI is in every aspect of our lives, right? Including Zoom. You remember how it used to erase people of color from the backgrounds, right? Because those are not faces. So I feel that District 3 would be an amazing target to really focus on raising diversity in terms of gender, not just because of the numbers, but also of the kind of impact it can have on future technologies, future startups, and the world in general. And I wasn't aware of this kids camp, the girls, is that the first year it's being offered? This girl SAP, was that it?
Oh, that's been going on for 4 or 5 years.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Because that's also like, it's engineering, right? Engineering and yeah, so
engineering technology, yeah.
So my personal interest would be to kind of build on those aspects of things, because I think we can have quite a strong impact there. And I was also thinking something else, but now I forgot, and I'll give over the floor to others.
Sure, and dump things in the chat too, because we'll collect that as well.
Tanya Tejmal's work. So she holds the CRC in equity, diversity, and inclusion in STEM. So she's in the Center for Engineering in Society. I don't know if you know her, Joey, but you know, she's obviously looking at a wider lens of EDI, but she has some amazing ideas. You would have a good conversation. And in fact, at one point I think she was joining. Maybe she's in some of the other rooms, but yeah, she's somebody, somebody we should be talking with.
So what's our equivalent? Go ahead, Liz. I was going to ask, what's our equivalent of, because it's 2015, since you brought up Justin Trudeau. What would we say? Because it's 2022. But go ahead, Liz.
Well, no, I really love what Joey said. I mean, it's one thing to have a feminist media studio where like there's a kind of draw of women and non-binary individuals who come. It's self-selected, right? But Joey, what you're talking about is like the innovation field, and that's where there's a lot of gender inequity. So I feel like there could be some really exciting work. I know I listened to a radio segment on how nonprofits across Quebec don't really know how to use new technologies, and how this is like, I think the whole government has made this massive investment in training of new technologies so that they will not be left behind, those nonprofits and all of the people they benefit. I think it was Centrade is leading that. And I think it's just sort of, that one is, as we're talking, does feel kind of one like we could make an impact of saying, yeah, exactly what Joey's saying is like when I came into my program, I think I was maybe for a decade, I was the only woman in moving images. This is changing. But just like really, I don't know what it is, but figuring out like a kind of goal of representation. I love the summer camps. And in combining that with leadership, like it's really true what Monica said about mentorship. Like it really matters when somebody promotes, suggests you, pokes you, whatever that is. And I don't know that we get any training on like how to be mentors, or like, for example, it wasn't until one chair in our department said, we're going to start putting forward people for awards, that suddenly we started doing that. It was as if like before that, nobody had thought to do that. And, so as Monica, you're saying, it's like without the kind of training of self-promotion, it doesn't happen. And when we're so busy, and it can seem kind of frivolous, honestly, but then as you say, like, how do those recognitions add up to other forms of equity? And I go back, okay, so I'm going to go back to the beginning of our conversation, which was the audit. Like, what's a kind of playful, helpful audit Like I know in media, there's been some really wonderful things like Alison Bechdel, like basically playful ways of noticing, let's call it, like the noticing audits, where you simply like count how many, positive representations of this you see in television, but is there a way to do it in our culture? Because I think the first thing I wrote in my notes is like, what is the culture that we're up against? Like there's all of these specific activities, but what's the bigger cultural framework that is so predominant? And how do we begin to puncture that? I don't think I've been as concrete as maybe I could have been, but those are a bunch of thoughts.
Super interesting.
One of the concerns as well that I hear is, we try to do things and they seem like a really good idea, but there are certain risks. Like one of the areas, to be a little bit more concrete, is I've been an advocate of these COVID impact statements, because it seems to me, if we don't hear from people, if they don't articulate, if they don't tell us, it's the storytelling, let's hear the narrative. But I'm hearing that there are tremendous risks involved in how they are received, that they can be actually quite detrimental, that to be careful about how we push that. So, I mean, and it makes us good, there's so much at stake that getting this wrong, and I don't know with the equity audit, if that's a risk as well in terms of how that would look, or how do we, so I just want to flag some of a real challenge that we face in trying to be leaders and being bold and in trying to do to break ground on some of these issues, the challenges that we face.
Yeah, but if I can say, Monica, I think that's exactly what I'm angry about, because I think that's an attitude that's kind of inherited maybe from the older board of directors or something, that's kind of risk averse at our institution. And, nobody remembers what you did like even 2 months ago, right? So I think that maybe, we just need to be a little less risk averse. And, a lot of the work I've been doing with my 6-year-old around like anti-racism is just teaching her, like, just say things. Yeah, you will screw it up. And that's okay. You will screw it up over and over again. And you might say the wrong thing, but it's more important to do something and speak, than be silent, right? Anyways, sorry, I'm obviously very passionate about this. I feel I'm definitely taking too much space. I'm trying hard not to.
Stephanie, I'm curious how directly involved with gender or equity audits that you've been, and have you seen any examples of organizations that have really embraced that and then articulated transformational kinds of goals for themselves and really kind of like been changed by the process, and that it's culture change and it's clarity on objectives, and it's it's really kind of like really, I guess transformational is the word I'm looking for. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I really don't know those examples. I mean, I've seen the odd case study that comes from the private sector, but all I can tell you is that they exist. and that there is a growing field around them, which is not unproblematic, but so I can't offer those concrete examples, unfortunately. But I think, just given my own small bit of expertise within that broader culture, there is a lot that can be made visible just through these kinds of processes.
Yeah.
And I think that's, in response to your question, and also picking up, I think, on something that Rachel mentioned earlier, I think in terms of, where we want to be in 5 years, I wouldn't feel comfortable saying that because I'm such a small part of this universe, right? And I think that, how we answer that question is a much broader, relates to a much broader process that really taps into the needs and that are identified by the communities that are impacted. So, you know, one way to uncover those needs is to have somebody do an audit. Another way is to do what you're doing now and have a more deliberative process with various groups throughout the university. But that has to be broad, and it has to be based on reciprocity and trust and, you know, all of these things. And then, you know, the other more radical approach would be to transform decision-making structures at the level of the university, you know, have a commitment to diversity in terms of how these structures are populated, and, you know, going to that representation piece, like, it's not enough to have a white woman as your diversity representative, right? You know, we really need to think about who's sitting at the table making the decisions for the broader university. And in making those decisions also, you know, tapping into those broader issues of the institution. So that would be my 2 cents. And I do apologize. I'll have to leave in about 5 minutes to go engage in that care work.
All right, thanks. Holly, do you want to jump in?
Yes, regarding the question that you had on like where we would see the university 5 years later, I wanted to bring a different perspective. I from seed, really the impact that we want to have is on the students, and like a good way to measure the impact of the university is like where our students are 5 years after their experience at Concordia University. So I know like it first of all start with the curriculum that they have at school. So I know that there are some initiatives in order to, like, I'm thinking, for example, at JSEC, which is, I forgot what's the term, but at John Molson, where we want to contribute a little bit more elements related to sustainability. So within the courses that we have, like how do we try to change the curriculum so that the students are more sensitized about it or more aware of it? Or like where do we invest, like how do we invest on experiential learning activities such as SEED? I know that a challenge like activities outside the classroom is the supervision, but how can we make the link between those two? Like the example that we have at SEED is that, for example, we try to work closely with the Loyola College for Diversity and Sustainability, and they evaluate the programs that we have either related to gender equality or the issues of lack of representation in media. Like we try to like making it like structured enough so that we can supervise it easily, and having students getting involved in it and learning about it, so that we know that in 5 years they will implement what they've learned in their, you know, day-to-day activities or their career, or like maybe later on they will be the leaders at the university. So yeah, that was my 5 cents.
Yeah, and where would you like to see SEED in 5 years? What's your grand vision?
Yeah, I mean, I think like definitely more collaboration with our faculties, right? So for now, we work very closely with the Loyola College for Diversity and Sustainability, but why not also working closely with, I don't know, the commerce faculty or arts and science, so like having our internships being recognized as a course where students can actually taking it as seriously as their other courses. So like we really try to push on having projects related to gender equality, and whether it is focused on that or not, those are elements that we try to bring it. So for example, we have a technology and education project in Uganda, and we try to focus on young girls, especially because we know that they do not have, they're maybe a little bit more shy to be in STEMs and things like this. So like the fact that we have students getting involved and trying to implement it in this community development project will make them even more, you know, aware of the challenges and experience it themselves, right? Not necessarily as as victims, but they try to, learn how we can, change the system. So yeah, that's what I see seed, where I see seed in 5 years. Continue what we're doing, but with more collaboration with our, professors or faculties.
Cool. Rachel, it made me think about your comment early on about your interest in sustainability, integration of sustainability into curriculum and so on. Do you have anything on the go in that front, or just,
Like
it's a little bit
Sandra.
alongside this conversation, but anyway, I'm just curious.
Well, no, but it's sort of, yeah. I mean, I think like where I want to see things in 5 years is I want to see us move to a slightly different mind frame where like the things that really define us as a community. So I think, for Concordia, like equity, innovation, honestly, with my AD hat on, interdisciplinarity, like are really at the core of how we make decisions at every level. So like we don't have a conversation about something without thinking about equity. And we don't have a conversation about like about growth without thinking about sustainability. So I think that's the shift I want to see, because I think it's hard, like, thinking about the strategic plan, right? Like I was in the minority of people who didn't think it was that bad. I thought it was actually kind of cool. And I liked the buzzwords because they were fun and they resonated for me in different ways but they're almost so like generic that they could be just like taken up by any cause. So you could, get your hands dirty in lots of different ways, like in a way that was, about community gardening, but also about like, I don't know, like doing something really evil with money, right? I don't know. I'm just being facetious, but I think it's like losing some of the jargon and just really getting to the core of the way that we make decisions would be what I want to see differently. And yeah, I think that like for me, like the really boring curriculum iteration is like, okay, so we have this very siloed system and the way that we have these very siloed other ways of making decisions. So how do we, work to really get at it at the level of infrastructure? Like how do we change that to work out collaborations that are still, within the realms of what we're able to do? I hope that we start having more questions. I think this is what COVID really left us with, is questions about capacity, right? About like putting conversations about like burnout, about growth, about what's possible, again, at the center of our conversation, so that like the great resignation doesn't happen at Concordia, right? And we know from who our colleagues are and how they've been responding that we have lost people because of burnout and frustration. We're losing good people. And yeah, I think it's, so for me, like the seismic shift needs to be like from the grassroots and at the center of like at the bottom of how we do everything, rather than things we're responding to or polls or goals we're trying to get to. Yeah.
Interesting. On the curriculum front, can you think of something that's, again, to borrow this phrase, that's big enough to matter and small enough to get done?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, I know, so I was fighting with Caro on Facebook last week about this, but I know the Enough Collective is pushing for, the students, didn't they just pass a referendum to push us all to include sustainability in our curriculum? So yeah, like Sandra and I have been talking a lot about, ways that could happen, right? Like introducing a credit component that, but then again, it's like, yeah, okay, so it's not something that we've done, but is it something that we could do? Is it something that we do sustainably, easily, without inconveniencing a lot of people in a way that actually benefits students? So I think like making these small tweaks and speaking across differences was one that could happen. But for sure, like graduate, we're talking a lot about graduate planning and sustainability. It doesn't feel obvious. Liz, we need to come talk to you at the Loyola College and your colleagues there about making something happen. But like, introducing an inter-faculty one credit course that all students took. It's hard, but it's totally doable. So yeah.
Now, sorry if I can add on what Rachel said. So, I keep talking about the College of Loyola for Diversity and Sustainability. And it's like one example within the university where they really try to push students within sustainability and where they have credits. But I feel like, we could have even more collaboration within and between faculties. I know that we have the possibilities in many programs to have electives for students. But like, how do we promote this type of programs? Because like the hard part is also getting to know what's happening within the university, because we also have to recognize that Concordia University is such a big ecosystem, and sometimes we tend to work between silos while we have so many great initiatives. And I keep advocating for the Loyola College for Diversity and Sustainability, because I mean, yeah, there's so much that could be done.
But can I say something about that? And like, don't go tell Faye. I don't know, don't go tell my bosses I said this, but like the Loyola, I was an undergrad at Concordia, right? And the Loyola College started when I was an undergrad in the 20th century. It was an option for me to take classes there. And it's still not institutionally built into something that's really sustainable, right? Like there's no tenure track, there's no faculty in it that are standalone faculty there. There's no, there's volunteers, right? Like there's people who are seconded through service. I mean, Rebecca Titler, like the amount of work that she puts in for somebody who is ultimately kind of precarious, it's remarkable. Like, and it's also, it feels like a little bit almost unethical. So like we're having all these big SDG conversations. We're trying to figure out how to build this curriculum. We have this Loyola College, but we can't run things through there because it isn't an academic unit in a way that like history or DCART or comp studies or poli-sci is an academic unit that can organize a class. So it's like, I think sometimes it's just taking a step back and seeing like where our priorities haven't been, and then reinvesting, because that would be, I mean, if the Loyola College had like a faculty member who could coordinate the classes, who we didn't have to worry about, renewing contracts for and applying for grants for and working with unions for, it could be a whole different story. So I think there's also like some reckoning with the way that we've set up infrastructure and conversations about sustainability. And in some ways, like also taking, I don't want to say taking advantage, but like relying on the labor of people who do it because they love it. But that hasn't produced sustainable growth. That's a problem too, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, Liz, jump right in.
Well, thank you, Rachel. I really, really appreciate what you just said about like Rebecca Titler in particular and some of these really invisible loads. But thank you. Okay, so the one thing I want to say is I feel like co-teaching is a pilot, and it's the most accessible, simple pilot that we have. It's something we all know how to do. We do it. It is a really interesting, fun way to put us in interdisciplinary context with other people. However, and there was this amazing initiative that I did that I loved. It was like a wicked problem. And MJ Thompson and we submitted a proposal. We are now dear, dear friends as a result of it. However, this kind of goes back to Rachel's point. It was the most time-consuming, exhausting thing I've ever done. Granted, we still loved it, but we got half credit for it, a half a credit of teaching for something that was 4 to 10 times the typical amount of work. So I really, 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 really want to advocate for that, but with the proper compensation. And I think it's like, it just makes so much sense. Like we came up with like 10 possible future courses through this, a research project. It was an absolute pilot of, do we like working together? Can we see things on the same page? And the only downfall was it was completely a labor of love, just exactly what Rachel just so poignantly said. It was like, at the end, the only bittersweet taste we had was like, wow, that was kind of exploitative. And it was, we self-imposed this exploitation in part, but I think just structurally, the fact that it was a half a credit is an indication of value. Maybe it should have been like a 2 credit thing. And then it's just like, wow, we really value interdisciplinary collaborative teaching or whatever. So I think there's something really, really easy step, as you were saying, Jason, like what's the sort of thing we can do without working too hard with this call of like, let's really deeply think about across discipline about like these sustainability goals and how we can be playfully implementing them and understanding them through praxis, which our everyday, every year praxis is teaching. And I really liked this concept too of like the 1 credit. It's the whole concept in the US, again, I'm from that capitalist center of the universe, the notion of onboarding. And this is a term that every private institution I worked at there would use. And they did it so well. And I say this a lot, but it's like, you know, what is the first message you get on campus as a freshman student? Like, is it about gender? Is it about equity? Is it about sustainability? How do we kind of foster that from the very get-go? And those are kind of low-hanging fruits. I mean, they can be clever and playful and exciting, but it makes you feel like when you join the Concordia community, there is this kind of, there are these values. And one of them is like, as Rachel actually said, like, get your hands dirty, or greening, or, you know, whatever it is, that they can be kind of loosely defined, but it can be kind of something you understand early on, like first year. Oh, okay, I get it. Like, I'm part of a group, a bigger community that cares about this.
Yeah. I remember this isn't at all what you're talking about, Liz, but I remember reading at one point that University of Virginia students signed this pledge when they first come on. You know, here's what the academic community means and what you're responsible for while you're here. And that's not at all what you're saying, but it rang that bell for me of like communicating, like, here, this is what we value and what's important to us. Sign here.
But like,
You're part of this community now.
We make them do that around things where we're forced to, right? Like, students have to do the assent pledge. Like, and then not that I'm not, so like, I'm saying like we already have the infrastructure for doing some of that, right? Like, they have to sign the pledge on sexual violence, and like, so they're going to have to sign something on, you know, an academic code violations and conduct, right? And, you know, for grad students, we already make them do that. So it feels like, yeah, it feels like sometimes it's like you're banging your head against these same arguments, right? Like, well, the union workload only allows for this, and like the precedent is this, and we don't co-teach, but it's like, why not? You know, and I think they're like putting a little bit of time and investment in a way that's like properly remunerated into thinking creatively is really great, because otherwise it only happens when you have some other kind of remission, right? Like, I sit there and talk to my associate dean colleagues about what we can do creatively, but like, the conversations are totally personal, based on our experience and detached from the rest of the faculty, but we have the time to do that kind of thinking. So it's really, it's hard, because like, yeah, I mean, why weren't you and MJ compensated for all of the hours that you put in to come up with the course in the first place? Like, it feels like small investments in thinking creatively about what can be done within the parameters seem to me to be really worth it, but we're so hesitant to do it.
I was going to say one more thing. I wanted to just acknowledge how it was also really deep investment in students. I love what you said about like 5 years on and how we understand what we're doing. I think that is just brilliant. Jason, that idea it's so in all the things that I've just had privilege to read lately about like sustainability at Concordia, one of the things that we're not tooting our horn about or talking about at all is the role of communication. So like, how are we communicating sustainability? Like, we could be a leader in that. And just what you're saying about that pledge, like I heard about a TED talk about how they're dealing with heat in Greece, and it was 3-pronged. And one was like effective communications, you know, like naming heat waves like we name hurricanes. 2 was technological design. And 3 was, I can't remember, but like one of 3 primary core issues was communication strategy. And it, like, in all the things I've had the access to read about sustainability, never is communication mentioned as an expertise that we might do in each of these aspects. I mean, of course, I'm a communication person, so I'm like, maybe I'm being a little self-serving in this, but it's like really valuing that we can have all the policies we want, we can have all of, but if we're not clever about how we're kind of inviting in the next generation into this endeavor, it's kind of like, we may not be successful.
I think communication got bumped by leadership and engagement. That communication was seen as, it's a little bit like outreach. It's just seen as a little bit too self-serving sometimes, but you're so right, Liz. I mean, even in terms of climate change, I mean, the fact that it was called global warming was such an error in communication, because I mean, how often do we hear family and friends say, oh, so there's your global warming, you know, just getting it wrong from the early stages just set us back like years. But I do feel that communication piece is so important, which is why students in geography, I think that the match with communication and the environmental, you know, the environmental education is just, it's just a beautiful marriage, really an important one.
We're rounding on 5 o'clock here, believe it or not. Anybody have any last thing they want to get on the table before we do a wrap up? No. Okay.
I agree with Stephanie. It was a great discussion. I really enjoyed it. And how should we continue? Should we have some sort of like offline, asynchronous little chat thing, or or just keep me? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. If you have ideas, I mean, we can always set that up for you. The issue that just in terms of kind of where this is going now from here. So this is room. Well, it's not going in sequence, but we're at SDG 10. We have 11 tomorrow. We have 2 this week because this was the makeup, and then we have to make our way through the rest. So we have several of these conversations to go. And then we're really kind of like, okay, what have we learned? Where are the opportunities for us? Where are there really things that we can embrace? What are the key messages? Where should we go from here? So we'll re-engage you as we're doing that thinking and give you opportunities to weigh in and think more about certain things that we think are really promising. But we're not ready to like tomorrow to jump into like action planning with you all, even though there's an amazing set of things that arose here today as possibilities. If you guys want to carry the conversation on before we're ready, by all means, and we can, I mean, you have everybody's email addresses, or we can set up a team site or whatever the channel is that you might want to use. By all means, go for it. And you can loop us in if you want about advice or next steps, or there are ways to, you know, navigate the system. I mean, Rachel probably has a whole bag of tricks as well in terms of curriculum related stuff or whatever, but there's going to be a little pause here while we kind of complete these conversations and figure out, okay, where does this indicate that we should go? But we hope to set up in the same way that VPRGS and Monica drafted this sustainable transition seed granting program that was announced in February, was it, Monica? We hope to create more opportunities like that. Cross our fingers, maybe also in the teaching space, to do exactly, Liz, maybe even exactly something like what you described, properly resourced for this kind of collaborative teaching. I mean, that's an ideal. So a lot of things here rang some bells that seem really resonant and that people are really ready to embrace, I hope. And I hope that this SDG commitment and these conversations around sustainability will continue to drive us to really value the things that we say we value and how we support them. And that's really what we're hoping this exercise helps us do. So huge thanks for taking time on this late afternoon, coming back for this conversation. Really great to engage with you, to hear your perspectives, get this interesting set of ideas on the table, and at least like note them down and think about them as real strong potential for things that we can move forward with. Any other last comments or words, Monica, from your perspective?
No, just huge thanks. This has been great. Lots of ideas and so concrete. That's really like we've had many good conversations, but we really had some very, very targeted suggestions here. Lots to follow up on. So thank you so much.
Yeah, so huge thanks, and just really appreciate all your investment and energy and ideas, and just really hope everybody has a nice end of the semester and onward into the summer. So thank you all, and have a great
Take
evening.
care.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.